Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. I'm Jason. Welcome to this special live stream. I have my guest here, Bryer from Bryer's Music Showcase. So generous to help me out with this live stream.
Pleasure.
Special live stream I had planned for a while that I've wanted to do. I talked a little bit why I chose to do this. Got Mike. Hey, Mike.
Hello.
What's up? Not much. Just hanging out, talking about music.
Yep.
I was just on Mike's channel talking about Spider-Man 2 earlier today. So nice of you to be up. It's pretty late. It's midnight there in England. So I know you probably have to go to bed. Appreciate the support, though. Yeah. The music mogul, Bryer.
Appreciate
That's
that.
right.
Maybe that should be my new name then.
The music mogul.
Yeah.
I almost want to call you the professor, but I think that name's already been taken. So
I think that's been taken by somebody else.
yeah.
Actually, I think there's a channel called Professor of Rock or something.
There is.
Yeah. So I don't want to get sued right now. I'm in college. I can't afford a lawyer.
Yeah, no, don't want that. But this is a series I wanted to do, kind of going through history of rock and roll music in a way, and covering the different genres of rock and roll music, and kind of defining what separates this genre from other genres, and in that kind of sense. And the reason I really wanted to do this was because really, for me growing up, I became a big fan of rock and roll music when I was 10 years old, and I discovered the Beatles. That's when I got into rock and roll, what I'd call rock and roll. And so my experience was listening to the British Invasion, rock and roll of the 60s, and folk rock were kind of the genres I was really into. And then getting to 70s, like, I don't know, I call it classic rock, basically the 70s. And then I discovered 90s rock as well, what we called alternative rock at the time. I know was a big term I kept hearing. I didn't know what that meant. I just kept hearing alternative rock. To me, I just call everything rock. I don't really think about the different genres as much. Though I know there's stuff like heavy metal, there's punk rock. I've heard of these other genres, and like I knew I wasn't a big fan of them, so I didn't delve into those genres as much and all that. And it wasn't until I met like Bryer, Nick, and Scott a couple years ago, we kind of formed this kind of group in a ways, and we started collaborating with each other. And those three individuals have, even though I'm like twice everybody's age, they all have like way more records than I do. They've been collecting since they were young, I guess. And I just started collecting in my late 30s, early 40s. I'm starting to collect, so I'm kind of way behind on collecting and kind of learning more about music. And the thing that I kept hearing that really I was like was prog rock. I kept hearing Bryer, Scott, and Nick talk about prog rock, and I had no idea what prog rock, which is progressive rock, short.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept hearing prog rock, and I was like, "What the heck is prog rock? And why do you guys keep talking about prog rock?" It was like it's funny, and maybe most people know what that is. I guess I'm coming from somebody who, I don't know, I didn't know what that was, and didn't know that was a thing. And I don't know if Bryer remembers me being like, had to ask you guys, what the heck is prog rock?
I vaguely remember. I can't remember
can you
where
define
I
it?
can't remember where you posted it at. It must have been one of the group chats or something.
Yeah, I was like, I really was like, you guys need to try to explain to me what prog rock is. I felt like I really need to get a grasp of what this meant, because you guys kept talking about it like it was a big deal. So I was like, I better figure out what prog rock is. And so that was a whole new kind of genre for me that I was not familiar with. And the ones I feel like the bands I feel like I had to get into was like Rush and Genesis. I feel like were the two big ones that the group that we're in that talk a lot about Rush and Genesis as like these big prog rock bands. Because I knew some of the hits from Rush and Genesis growing up on the radio, but I really didn't know those two bands very well. And I don't, like I said, I didn't know prog rock very well. And I think that's because it's not really a radio friendly type genre,
No.
I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't know it. And like my parents never listened to it. My sister never listened to it, my older sister, and my friends didn't listen to it. So I was just totally oblivious to what prog rock was. So I had to learn. And even to this day, I still struggle with what prog rock is. I kind of got somewhat of a grasp of it now, and all that. But anyways, so that's what kind of started me on this idea of like, there's all these different genres I'm not even familiar with. Yacht rock is another one. I keep hearing people go yacht rock, yacht rock. I'm like, what the heck is yacht rock? I never heard anybody say yacht rock until the last couple of years. And then now there's a thing called yacht rock. Anyways, but there's a million types of genres, it feels like, out there.
Yeah.
Not even aware
to
of.
some people, there might be even too many genres out there.
Oh, literally, I'm sure there's at least 100 genres. I mean, literally, like
so many genres, even like thousands of subgenres.
Subgenres, yeah. I was gonna say, like you say punk, and then it's like, oh, there's like this punk, this punk, this punk.
Yeah,
I'm like,
exactly.
I just want to know about punk. Yeah, I didn't even know all these subgenres of punk. And there's proto punk, there's something punk. I'm like, what? There's pop punk. There's, I don't know, whatever. I'm making up stuff, but that's probably as a genre, I'm sure. But yeah, and so that kind of got me into going, what are the different genres? So I kind of did this research and kind of went through Wikipedia and just kind of researched the heck out of different genres of rock music. And I thought it'd be interesting to do, and that's what I thought, doing a series. My goal is to define these genres and kind of try to explain it as best as we can, and for people to understand who may. I'm thinking there's people like me out there that don't know all the types of genres, and I wanted a way to try to break it down. What is this genre? Why is it different than this genre? Why is heavy metal different than punk rock or whatever? How is new wave different than prog rock? I kind of want to really somewhat delve down into like how do you, and anyways, and so that's my idea. Hopefully this is educational to anybody that doesn't know, because this is me learning a lot of this stuff myself. Some of the stuff I know already, like the 60s rock, a lot of that stuff I know, but other types of rocks I'm not as familiar with because I don't listen to it, and all that anyway. So that's the basis of why I wanted to do this series. And so I asked Bryer to join me, because I feel like out of everybody I know, Bryer's, I always felt like, is very knowledgeable about the different genres. I feel like anytime you do either a CD haul, or when you do a collaboration with Nick or with our group, often, of course, we say background information, and Bryer's usually the guy that does the background information. Sometimes I do it if they let me, but Bryer oftentimes will do the background information on stuff. So you seem like somebody to me, Bryer, that you can listen to music and point out the genre pretty well. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I mean, of course, I do some research as well just to verify. But yeah, I mean, I've listened like, I think I can say pretty confidently, out of everybody in our group, I'm the one who has the most out there in terms of genres in my collection. Like, yeah, so many different. So yeah, I definitely know quite a bit, and of course, I've had and the reason why I wanted to be a part of this was, again, like you said, like, again, I have like all this type of music, and yeah, I'm also a big history kind of guy. I like learning about history and stuff like that, because I generally do like to go behind the scenes on certain bands and albums, just to give context to, okay, why was this done the way it was, and just give some kind of context on why things are the way they are. And yeah, I mean, I've always kind of been fascinated on the history of rock music and different genres. And yeah, I think because of that, you kind of start to build some kind of appreciation. Even if you're not a fan of the genres, you're kind of going out saying to yourself, okay, at least I kind of get what they're doing.
Yeah.
I kind of get what they're trying to do here.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the fun part.
Yeah. Try to hopefully get a concept. Like I think like I'm getting a little bit better now. I can hear a song or music, and I kind of try to pick out what genre it is. I'm like, I hear it, I'm thinking, oh, that sounds like it's new wave. Like I'm starting to get a little more into new wave lately. That's a new
Hmm.
genre I didn't really know much about until recently. So I'm like, okay, I think that sounds new wave maybe. Or I listen to something and I think, oh, that might be prog rock. I don't know. I'm not as good, I feel like, as you and Scott and Nick, maybe, especially you, I think, are much better at picking out the different genres. Yeah, because if you look at someone's record collection, you can kind of get an idea of like what they like. If you look at mine, you're going to be like, yeah, he likes British Invasion, he likes folk rock or whatever. He likes the classic rock of the '70s. Same thing for like Nick or Scott. You're going to get mostly '60s and '70s rock or something like that. You know,
And then for me, it's like
you look
anything
at
goes.
Bryer.
Anything goes.
Bryer, you get like every. I feel like you have every single genre in your collection.
Oh, I don't think so. I'm only
Much closer.
I'm only like a scratch of what's out there.
But you're the only one that has probably heavy metal and punk rock or whatever
I
maybe
mean,
on your list.
heck, I'm one of the few people who has the Shags on CDs, so that kind of tells you.
Yeah. So yeah, that's why I was really wanted Bryer to join me because I figure he has a pretty good knowledge of it, of the different types of music. Anyways, can hopefully fill in the holes that I don't talk about or
Yeah.
whatever.
And one more thing, prepping for this, again, a lot of my information, of course, I do my stuff online, but I actually do have this book here, right here. What's that sound? And it's literally an introduction to rock and its history.
Okay.
And the reason why I have this was because I think in college I took a class that
Okay.
talks about rock history, but I ended up dropping it because it was too freaking easy.
You're like,
Because I
can I
knew
take this class, professor?
yeah, I was like, oh man, I know all this stuff already. So yeah, I ended up dropping it, but I ended up keeping the book, so it's still here.
Okay.
It's a little bit beat up because it was like a used kind of copy I bought, but the inside still looks pretty good, and just gives you a lot of history. Talks about all types of genres, and even sometimes it'll have like moments where it will actually break down a song.
Oh,
Like
cool.
I'm on a page talking about breaking down "Cream Sunshine of Your Love," talking about the form, the time signature, and what all the different sections and what instruments being played on it. So I thought this would be a good way to finally put this to use.
Oh, perfect. Because I was gonna say it's interesting, kind of trying to break down, music because I can't talk really on a technical level. Like,
Yeah,
um, what?
it's kind of similar. Like I wouldn't say I'm a technical person, but the more you kind of start to listen and you
Yeah,
kind of pay attention, you kind of learn
yeah,
to and over time, even in people's videos, you'll pick up terms like okay, and you'll connect certain things. So yeah, it's kind of a process.
yeah. I feel like I can hear a song and like I thought like there's something about I can hear a blues song and I can tell you okay there's blues and I'm trying to think I don't know how I know that's blues but there's something about blues music that has a specific sound to it that
Hmm.
my ear can catch. Same
Yeah.
thing with jazz, same thing with country music. I don't know what it is about it, but there must be something about it because there's a reason why I can pick it out with my ear, though I can't explain it technically. But I know there must be a technical reason why this is that. Like I think, and I'm thinking like I'm sure there's some technical level like blues is on this scale, music scale, and
Yeah.
country music plays on this music scale, and I have no idea
Uh,
what that means. If you told me music scale, I'm like whatever. Like
yeah.
I, I, I played the saxophone in high school, so I kind of have a general knowledge of musical terms, but that's about
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, this isn't like I
And I
never.
played violin for a time, so yeah, so kind of the same boat.
And I
I
played,
completely forgot most. I can't read music anymore, so
yeah, like I haven't read music in a while since I played saxophone in high school. Like I play the guitar, but I just play chords and
hmm
tablatures and stuff. Of
yeah,
course, I play bass, so probably
yeah, same thing. I just look up tabs and stuff.
yeah, you look up
mainly.
tabs and you just look at the fingering, you hear the
Yeah.
song, and you try to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and but I'm not like so good, like, really good, musicians will say that's in, what do you call it?
That's
Um,
in C. That's a C scale, C major
that's in
scale.
the key of G, and I'm like, I have no
Yeah.
idea what that means. I hear that all the
Yeah.
time. Let's play it in the key of C. I'm like, I have no idea what that means. A good musician would know, but I'm like, just tell me what the chords are, and I can strum it for you. But yeah, anyways, so yeah, for me, when I'm talking about music, I'm probably not talking. I can't get too technical. I'm not good enough for that. So, but I'll try my best to kind of explain in layman's terms what I think, what the terms mean. I guess that, in my sense, anyways. But yeah, all right. So the first question I have to ask you, Bryer, is how would you define rock and roll music?
Yeah, so rock and roll, again, it's, of course, when you look up the history of rock and roll, you kind of realize it's not like easy to pinpoint
Mm,
exactly when it truly began, because
no,
again, because before that there were just so many genres, and kind of going back into like before rock music, again, a lot of the big stuff that was you'll most likely hear like 1930s and 40s. A lot of it was like jazz, blues, and even country and bluegrass were a thing by this point. But
mm,
before radio and before like TV, everything was kind of regionalized, where
yeah,
everything was kind of just put, everything just kind of stayed in one place. They didn't really venture off. So if you were born in a certain region and the place you were born in has a sound, you'll probably hear that sound and probably nothing else. But of course, once radio came in, and now people were getting like national connections. Now music was starting to travel a bit more to different places, to different areas that had not heard these before, and because of that, you have a lot of genres starting to mix.
yeah,
And so, but you know, by the time you get to like for example, another thing that was kind of like kind of hold it was of course a lot of like the black musicians. They were kind of forming doing their own thing, because of course blues music kind of really started with African Americans, kind of dating back to even like the 1800s. It's always been around during
yeah,
slavery, and always singing about stuff like that. And about after World War II, you have, again, black musicians starting to move into big cities. So they're taking their stuff to like probably the big places from rock, that they're like the big uh, landmark cities like Memphis, Chicago, and Detroit. Those would become big areas where rock music began to take place. And the thing about then eventually, once things started to mix, black musicians were starting to take on other genres. They're starting to incorporate jazz into blues, and around this time you have the big bands starting to kick in. Usually
yeah,
there's like a person, there's a band leader, then you have he's usually maybe on piano or something, then you have like the drummer, then you got like the upright bass player, and you have electric guitar as well, which was invented like early 1930s, which was meant to like make the guitar louder for like bigger stuff, so it can keep up with the big band of horns around them, so it
yeah,
can still be audible. So, and then you had like a singer, and well, not always a singer, but sometimes you'll have a singer. And it's always interesting because by this point, technically that's where bands were starting to take place. Of course, their definition of bands was a bit different than how we think of bands, because in that period, usually when we think of bands, usually the lead singer is like the main show. They're in front. Everyone talks about the singer, but in that time, it was usually the band leader who got all the attention, not the singer. So it's kind of interesting how stuff like that came.
mhm,
But anyway, eventually the big band started to take on different types of more starting to take on more faster tempos, and start become put more groove to it, because you think like classic jazz, usually it's not like stuff you dance to very much. It's usually just stuff you lay back and listen to it. But once once these musicians start to incorporate different, more fast-paced, fast-tempo rhythms, now people were starting to move. They're starting to dance a bit more, and at this point, because it was based in blues and there was a lot of rhythm involved. There you go. You got rhythm and blues, or how we call it, R&B.
R&B, yeah.
R&B. So R&B is kind of like the genre that kind of is like the first kind of incarnation, what we call
Mhm.
rock and roll.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, but by that point, it was still kind of a black only audience that was listening to it, because again, not many radio stations were playing that sort of thing. It's mainly a white audience that was listening to the radio at the time. But it was around. I wrote this down. I wrote this down actually but I know when TV started to come around, when TV was becoming big in like the 50s. You know,
Yeah.
many kind of white audiences were going to the television, which kind of left a lot of radio stations without any radio, without anything to play, and so all they had left was the black audience, and so they would start playing a lot of R&B on the radio, and that was how the white audience got introduced to R&B. And now the white audience is starting to be like, hey, what's this music? I haven't heard this before.
Yeah.
And this became very popular with the young crowd, that teenage
More of
audience.
a thing, probably, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of where R&B was really starting to become popular.
They used to call it race music.
Oh yeah, yep. That's a good old times language. Anyway,
Yeah, I think there's definitely a racial divide, and of course in
yeah,
America, because it's all kind of rock
still
and roll kind
segregated. Yeah.
of,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, because of segregation in this time period, you probably had white artists, black artists, and I assume there's probably white families are like, we're not listening to that, or black families saying we're not listening to that. I don't know. And like you said, it kind of united maybe the races in some ways.
Yeah, totally did, especially with the young crowd, because now young white teens were listening to, black musicians, and they were loving it. They kind of had brought something different from what the older generation was listening to. Again, had this very upbeat, very thing you can move to, and yeah, just kind of kept going from there. And eventually, you have your first big stars just start to kind of rise from there, and a lot of them were African Americans. You have stuff like Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, and of course Little Richard.
Mm-hmm.
And also in the 1950s, you also have the rise of disc jockeys or DJs that were playing a lot of this stuff. And yeah, so it kind of just kept going from there. And of course, I think we should also mention it wasn't just African Americans that were primarily making stuff. There were some white musicians that were playing stuff like this, very similar things. Of course, IB, they were doing covers mainly, which I'll talk about more about that in a bit. Um, but yeah, just kind of course you have Bill Haley in the comments. Of course, it was once that movie came out. It was, what was it called? Rock Around the Clock.
Blackboard Jungle is the name of the movie.
Oh, Blackboard Jungle. Okay.
And they played rock and roll, or rock around the clock, like I think in the
Yeah,
end.
that was like the opening song.
Opening song. Yeah.
Yeah. Once that movie came out, that's kind of when the genre really started to take its toll. And eventually we'll get to Elvis. And once Elvis hits, that's when it really gets even bigger. But going back to the original question, that very long-winded explanation, what defines rock and roll? Bottom line, it's just this kind of, even I can't really say what it is exactly. It's kind of this, it comes down to the feel, just that, again, a lot more, that very fast tempo drum beats, usually in 4/4. I just, that's me throwing a technical term. I know what 4/4
Like,
is. I can't do a 4/4, but I've heard that term before.
I've heard that.
A lot
Yeah.
of time. Yeah. And again, just a very, very upbeat, very, very kind of, there's some guitar in it, but obviously not the like shredding guitar. It's more like just a rhythm type of thing. We're not there yet. But yeah, it's just kind of like just playing along, and just this, overall, you're supposed to have a good time while you listen to it.
Yeah. They were Hendrix yet.
Yeah, no, not there, not yeah. But like Marty McFly says, Those kids will love it.
Kids will love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, when I was thinking about like how to define rock and roll, obviously you got the name rock and roll. Like I think there's a movement. It's
Yeah,
based.
like I think rock and roll. When you're on a boat, they say you
Yeah,
rock and roll, like you're
yeah.
moving, and it's kind of the same thing when you listen to the music. You're just
You move.
you're
Yeah.
moving. Yeah.
So I think that's the basis of it. I would say, like, yeah, when I was thinking, like, what is rock and roll, and I come to only two very simple conclusions, and that is, fast paced and loud. I think that's what maybe differentiated it from like,
Granted, our definition of loud is way different than their definition of loud.
is- oh, exactly, yeah.
Mhm.
But I think rock and roll, for it to be rock and roll, you have to be fast. You said upbeat is a good word.
Mhm.
I think rock and roll, you need to be upbeat, and you need to be loud. Those are the two components I think you have to be rock and roll. Because I was thinking at the time in the 50s, when we're talking about again the 50s, like what was popular at the time. Like you mentioned, I think big band music was still like a thing where,
Yeah, like stuff like Duke Ellington was
uh,
probably one of the big ones. I think I wrote down a couple more other type of. Most of these people I don't know, but in their time they were pretty famous, like Glenn Miller,
yeah, Glenn Miller, very
Denny,
popular.
like Benny Goodman, stuff
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You had those people that were like conducting it, and you had the horns and
Hmm.
the woodwinds and the brass and all that. And I think of like in the 40s, there was I call it crooner music when it was Bing Crosby, Frank
Yeah,
Sinatra, Dean Martin.
that's
Sam,
kind of when you had your first like pop stars at that time.
yeah, but it's a different kind of, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it's just this guy with a mic and he's
Kind of
singing.
suave,
Yeah,
kind of.
it's slower music, I would say, for the most part. And that's probably what the parents were listening to. The parents were like into that maybe, and then by the time you get to the 50s, um, there's probably country music out there was probably popular in the
Yeah, yeah, it was there at the time.
yeah. So you probably had your 50s, like 40s, 50s country music. Country, I'd call it country western maybe.
Hmm.
Uh,
Bluegrass was there.
Bluegrass, yeah, bluegrass. Bluegrass was the thing like in the South Midwest area,
Hmm.
maybe more amongst the white crowds,
Yeah,
maybe
very much. Yeah.
I would assume.
Hmm.
Um, and so to me, yeah, when you get rock and roll music, that's much different than those genres. And it just changed music in that sense that I'm sure the parents were like, this is way too loud. And the kids are like, I love it.
Yeah.
Because I think this was my thinking, and you'll tell me what you think, is the big part of rock music is dancing. I think that's why rock took off amongst younger crowds. I think
Hmm.
younger crowds, kids love to dance. Uh, and I'm thinking back in like the 20s, there's probably like jazz clubs, maybe,
Yeah.
and blues clubs. I don't know, where people went and danced. I remember I seen like pictures of like women in those flapper dresses, and men probably just wore suits and ties.
Hmm.
But I think they went out and I don't know. Dancing is so fun for younger people. Like I don't care about dancing myself.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
yeah, I agree. And I think the difference between those like jazz and kind of blues, like I mean blues, I don't really see you dancing to it very much,
yeah,
but
maybe blues, you're right.
but jazz, for example, I mean
Yeah,
there's like swing, there's jazz swing.
swing. Yeah,
That
yeah.
was probably there. It was there around that time, and yeah,
Well,
people dance to it.
I read something called jump blues, which I'm guessing is like faster paced blues or something like that.
I would assume so.
I would assume.
Um, yeah, but yeah, when I think of like dancing, like before rock and roll, like you said, it was kind of more formal. It wasn't like anything crazy or anything. It was like kind of formal. Maybe it's like traditional like slow dancing, and maybe if they do go a bit fast, maybe it is a bit faster. Maybe they'll kind of loosen up a little bit. But it will still be kind of restrained.
Yeah.
And it kind of brings up what another factor. What kind of sets rock and roll a little bit different from everything else is that it's simple. Stuff like jazz, for example, like it's very much a musician type of thing where it's very people are like constantly like really concentrating like okay how to compose this, how okay horns go here, okay, let's write that in, okay, how's the bass gonna go? Okay, the bass is gonna go like that, like very thought out type of stuff. But when it comes to rock and roll, like if you listen to like again like a Chuck Berry or a Little Richard, it's it's pretty simple, really. It's just simple chords, and again, it's just a simple tempo. There's no like crazy time signatures. Again, a 4/4 is like
That's
the
the
that's the most basic one.
that's basic.
It's a simple one that anybody can find a rhythm to it. And once there's a rhythm, that's going to get people dancing.
Yes, yeah, the rhythm part, yeah, is what
Mm-hmm.
gets people on the dance floor.
Mm-hmm.
And guessing
And
that
because
just
of the faster pace, it kind of led the younger crowd to be like really go all out and be like more loose with it, nothing too restrained or formal. It's all just you have go crazy.
exactly, and I think that's what took off with rock music with the younger, like I said, younger crowd. Like I'm thinking, yeah, jazz maybe did that in the 20s and 30s or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
then the 40s. I feel like during World War II,
Yeah, World War II, played a part.
boogie woogie music, which is really bouncy piano. It just has very bouncy piano tune. You
Mm-hmm.
know, Eagle Boy and the Company B, bump a
Mm-hmm.
bump a bump a bump a bump a bump bum. It's like that kind of music. That and
Mm-hmm.
it gets you dancing. You go, oh yeah, yeah. I'm bouncing. I'm thinking that's kind of where, and so then we get so rock is kind of formed from those type of genres.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I said, a big part of it is like the fast pace of it gets you up and dancing early on anyways. I don't know if you dance to heavy metal, but you dance to like that
You
early.
well, your head does the dancing.
You dance.
Mm.
Yeah,
Unless you
I think
count mosh pits as dancing.
I don't know.
I've
um,
never been in a mosh pit, by the way.
oh good.
Well, actually, I kind of have, but I didn't really go in it.
I,
I've seen it.
yeah, I don't know if you have the same experience as me, Bryer. I mean, I've never been to a club before. I've never been to a
No, yeah,
bar.
no, yeah,
I'm
no.
thinking
I've never been to I've never actually sat at a bar either.
me either. And so I'm thinking back in the day, you probably had, it was more about live acts. I've never
Mm-hmm.
been anywhere where there's like a live band. I just never.
I've been to like a couple who had like a live band in there.
Yeah, which is a cool idea. I would like that, but I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm guessing that's a bigger deal back in the day. Like I said, I think you went to the jazz clubs and you dance. And I always think of blues. Blues is like a bar, like you're in a bar drinking, and because I always feel like blues is a downer type music, like
Yeah, it can be. Yeah.
my baby left me. Like that's blues. Like it's always like bad stuff happened to you, and
Yeah.
so people are drinking the bar, feeling bad about themselves, and going, "Oh man, this blues music is speaking to me." I
Yeah,
don't.
that's that's blues. A lot of it again, a lot of it singing about hard times,
Yeah,
stuff like that, trying to survive.
yeah, that's my feeling on blues music. So jazz, I feel like maybe is more the dancing, maybe music at
Mm-hmm.
the that kind of influenced what would eventually become, like you said, R&B, be rock music, basically. Um, Yeah, so yeah, I don't know. And country plays some part in that as well. Like I said, I think swing country. I've heard that
Yeah.
name.
And then you have rockabilly that becomes big
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Now, yeah, that goes into rockabilly, which would be the big kind of rock genre in the '50s, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say gospel. Probably throw that in there as well.
Yeah, I think gospel, especially in the vocal department, a lot of gospel played a big role in how people sing it, like how people will belt out a lot more. Because again, going back to the crooner stuff, like you mentioned before, it was like again very professional, very
Yeah,
kind of straightforward, and very kind of somewhat classically trained. But when gospel comes in, that's when people are singing from the soul and just really, if it's untrained or anything, it just comes down to feel and just expression, and a lot of that kind of influenced a lot of rock vocalists.
hey Tom, no problem.
Oh, hey Tom.
Little history lesson that we had
Yeah,
on kind of what I think. Yeah, where influences come from. You talk. Yeah, everything you said was exactly what I was thinking. Uh, yeah, and it's interesting. I was thinking about that today. That like you take it for granted that like I have all this music on vinyl and CDs, and I have the radio, And I was thinking, I think the radio wasn't a thing until maybe the 30s, I want to say. I
Yeah.
know by the time the 40s came around, it was a big deal because of Franklin Roosevelt did his radio.
Mm-hmm.
So I know by
Right.
time, but I think it started maybe in the 30s, but it was new. It was
Yeah.
new.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where you can maybe start listening to music. Like I said, like besides that, if you want to listen to music, I'm guessing you had to go hear it live. Like that's how you listen
Yeah,
to.
yeah, 100%. That was how most people enjoyed music back in the day.
And I don't think about that because I don't think about going hearing stuff live. I just because I got all this. I mean, for goodness sakes, I got everything on Spotify right now. You know, I don't need to go anywhere. But at that time, you had to go somewhere to hear
And
music.
also people were recording live, and also, even today, even like kind of funny because everything was recorded live back in the day. Like there was not really studios at that point. Well, it was done in the studio, but when they went on radio, it was always done live. It was a live setting.
Yeah,
So when you hear back
yeah,
then when you listen to the radio, it was always a live band that was playing.
you're right. I didn't think about
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
That's much different than what we do today.
Yeah. I mean, heck, we have live albums these days, which
Yeah,
even makes it even easier not to go out.
yeah. I was thinking because I have a pretty good collection of Bing Crosby albums,
Hmm.
and a lot of those were recorded, yeah, back in like even the 30s, I think, some of them,
Yeah,
and
and even recordings were done live. Like there's
and
no overdubs, no layering of vocals or anything, no backing. It was recorded with just a few mics. That's it. That's all you got.
yeah, when I looked at the record, these Bing Crosby records I have, yeah, it looks like there's pictures of him in the studio, like the cover is just him like in the studio with a mic. So I'm thinking, oh, he probably just went into the studio one day and sang this album, and now this is what this album is that I have. It's just him coming and singing all these songs of that time period. But yeah, yeah, so very interesting when I think the radio definitely was like the really because again you forget that there's a time when there's no TV, so you sat around the radio and listened to the radio. That was your entertainment at the time. And then 1950s is really when TV became like a big thing, as far as I know.
Yeah, I think the TV was kind of came around, started in the 40s, but yeah, kind of became popular by the 50s.
I know, yeah, 50s television really started getting popular. So yeah, like I said, that's when you can see musicians, yeah, on the TV, and that kind of overtook the radio eventually. So, but yeah, it's interesting to think about the time before that, like how that would change. Like you said, it's more regional. I didn't think about that, but you're exactly right. Depending on, because like I said, like you said, like I think blues music, I think Chicago, Memphis, and you said Detroit as well.
Detroit, yeah,
I didn't
that's where
think.
a lot of the blues musicians went.
Okay. So that's kind of Midwest. That's kind of the Midwest right there. I
Yeah.
would say, and I would think I always think the South is kind of blues heavy, maybe as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's where a lot of those blues musicians started before they went to those
Uh,
cities. Is
when
the
I
South.
when I think of jazz, I think of New Orleans. I don't know what else, but
Yeah, New Orleans, pretty much
um,
it. Yeah, I know that was probably the biggest area with the jazz scene. I know
which
I'm
yeah,
trying to think of other places on the top of my head, like big places. But yeah, I think that's like a good one.
yeah, and that's kind of the South. So I'm thinking like that kind of music, yeah, kind of Midwest South was like heavy maybe on that. But then I think country music is probably heavy in the South too.
Yeah,
So you also had that genre as well, and I'm guessing folk music probably as well in the South probably.
yeah, probably a little bit.
But then I'm thinking, okay, then I'm negating the whole East Coast, which I'm sure was something. Maybe it was I don't think about as much, I guess, but I'm sure the genres were there too,
Yeah,
as well. But like you said, those are the kind of the hubs that I think about is those areas. Um, yeah. Let's see. I got some comments. Well, I was gonna kind of mention this as two things I think are somewhat. It's not essential, but I think it's something to consider about rock and roll music.
hmm
And one is, I think there's a rebellious type. There's a
mm,
that
yeah,
ingrained in rock and roll music. If I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like there's almost I don't almost an, and I don't know, maybe this is true of other genres, but I always think of rock and roll as like this almost anti-establishment, anti-authority kind of. Maybe not right then. It eventually become more that way, I guess. But
No,
still,
yeah, I think you're right because again, you know, a lot of white parents thought rock and roll was
yeah,
like devil music.
yeah,
That's kind of where that whole began because again, there was a little bit of a dangerous to it. Of course, if you listen to like Chuck Berry or Little Richard, if you read their lyrics, it's pretty risque for that time, like very sexual driven. That a lot of white parents kind of saw that as like, oh no, we're not doing that. And there are even some studios that you wouldn't tell them like maybe ditch the sexual lyrics. And of course, once white musicians started covering like black artists, then they pretty much rewrite the entire song just to get rid of any risque or inappropriate lyrics. Of course, that's kind of where white appropriation would kind of start becoming a thing. But that's a whole different discussion. But yeah, there was a pretty rebellious because again, it was like if my parents are saying that I shouldn't be listening to it, but I'm going to listen to this anyway.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. There's just something
Because
kind of
there's the whole boom of teen rebellion. Rebel Without Cause. That's like the
yes,
big film that talked about like teen rebellion and
yeah,
teen alienation, and that whole mentality, that whole thing, of how the young crowd was feeling around this point.
yeah. I guess as kids growing up in the World War II era, they kind of
Mm-hmm.
there's something about that them growing up during that World War II time that I know they came 50s and 60s became like kind of this teen rebellious era. I feel like
Mm.
you really like I've heard it explained like you didn't really have teens before that time period because I feel like once you became a teenager, like you got a full time job and you got married and had kids, like like it was much different for a teenager back in the day. You didn't. We think of teenagers like, oh, this is fun time period where you just party and have fun with your friends. And I think back in the day, it wasn't
That's
that
not
way.
my child. That's not my teen years.
That wasn't. But I think in back in the day, like once you became 13, it's like, oh, go out and get a job, or I don't know. I'm probably I'm joking a little bit, but there's some sense of like, grow up. You got to grow up, and then in the 50s, 60s, felt like no, you're like gonna go have fun and be a teenager, and it's like the invention of the teenage years or something. If that makes sense. And as a teen, you're rebellious. Like I was slightly rebellious towards my parents, not terrible, but I think every teen you have to feel some rebellion towards your family, towards the teachers, the authority. And so rock and roll music just fit right in with like the teen crowd, I think. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, yeah, there's these big genre of teen rebellious movies like Rebel Without a Cause, Blackboard Jungle, same way. And they would always put rock and roll music to these movies because that just fit the genre, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Keith said this, so I was going to mention this, and you mentioned this. I think the other thing you have to consider maybe is the sexual references. Of course, he says rock and roll was the sexual reference, which I've heard that too. That it could be, it's been talked about in a sexual way, but uh, again, like you said, I think rock and roll kind of brings in some sexual.
And then of course there's Elvis. Going back to Elvis, how he danced was another big
Yeah,
thing. How he
uh,
gyrates his hips and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah. Once you can see him, and yeah, he was gyrating,
And of
and
course, when it was during TV age, so people were seeing that for the first time to a white audience, and of course, a lot of parents were pissed off at that.
yeah, I think Elvis especially. Yeah, and I think you said yeah, Chuck Berry and Little Richard. I don't know, there's a little bit of I mean, again, it's 50, so it's not as bad as it is today,
Right.
but there was some, sexual, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
something to that was
Because
different.
again, that also appealed because in your teenage years, that's kind of when you're sexually starting to become hormones start flying.
I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So it kind of fit with the teenagers. Like I said, I think adults were listening to crooners. They're also listening to show tunes. When I look up like what sold well, it's always like some musical that was on
Mm.
Broadway would sell very well. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, those felt like the more wholesome music that the parents were listening to, and then the kids were listening to this yeah devil music, the rock and roll stuff, and it felt like, you know, and we'll talk about this more in the '60s when we get to that, you know, at some point, where the teens, I feel like, will start becoming more mainstream. The music that the teens like at this time, it's like the adults are the ones buying the records, so that's what's selling well. But then when we get to like the '60s, I guess, again, we'll talk about that later, I guess. But then what the teens like, were starting to sell, and so the rock and roll was starting to get more popular and become more mainstream. But
Hmm.
we see it starting to get mainstream here in the '50s first, but then really hits really hard in the
Yeah,
'60s. As
that's
far as,
when, yeah, it's kind of going when people are, a lot of musicians are going to take that style and really, you kind of a kind of kind of do like an evolution of it, kind of update it.
yeah, yeah, and kids are like, I gotta buy this record, and then so everybody's like, okay, we gotta start making music for the teenagers because they're buying the records now.
Hmm.
That kind of thing. Anyways, yeah, Elvis. I always think about. I remember seeing this interview with Billy Joel. I believe it was Billy Joel that, and he said, yeah, our parents were afraid, you know, us seeing, you know, Elvis gyrating. They're afraid that we're gonna have, you know, we're gonna start having sex with each other after seeing this. And they said, and our parents were right. So, which I always thought was funny. So it was like the parents probably were right. It did it did stir something up into the kids, and yeah, you'll see more teenage pregnancies in the you know, in decades later.
Yeah,
That would start being a bigger thing. But yeah, anyways, but yeah, Tom says, yeah, gospel and blues and early rhythm and blues, almost entirely black focused genres, had a huge influence. Yeah, yeah, it's funny. Yeah, you have to say it all kind of came from. Uh, I don't know. I almost think when I think of rock and roll, I probably think more of white bands. I don't think of a lot of black bands. But then, but you think the origin, it came
yeah,
from more black music, so it's kind of
yeah.
interesting. Kind of, to me, kind of turned a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense, but um, you know what I mean. Anyways,
Mm.
it says Keith says sheet music was a big business before
That's
big.
true. Again, going back to like the big bands, you know, all of them was composed by a single guy. That was like your, that's because that's the equivalent of a songwriter, in those
Yeah,
days.
yeah. Imagine some people went out of business at some point when it's like I can't compete with Elvis. or um, I definitely know when the Beatles came around, there were some acts that were like, "Yeah, I can't compete with the Beatles. I'm done for. Like, I'm gonna go do something else for a living." um, Keith says St. Louis. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's probably another
In the
big
Missouri,
area.
kind of Midwest area. There's a fear it would corrupt the youth, and it did. Yeah, I was gonna say, and rightly so. It probably did.
Maybe, but the world got interesting after that.
But we get all this great music, so uh,
Yeah,
you,
and it wasn't black and white. It was starting to turn away from black and white.
yeah.
Well, then again, that's more a '60s thing. But yeah,
It's kind of like the internet. It's like, man, internet. There's so much good stuff, and then you go, oh, there's so much bad stuff.
it's like yeah, yeah.
Take the
It's
bad.
like take what you leave. It's like take or leave. What's good and what's bad.
See, if neither of you have seen the 10-part docuseries, The History of Rock and Roll, it's a must. Sadly, I don't think it's on streaming. You have to find the DVD set. I wonder.
I know there's many documentaries that talk about rock's origins.
Yeah, I saw a. I don't know. I saw something on YouTube before that did a really good job going through the rock and roll. Yeah, that was really good. I wonder if that's what you're talking about. I feel like I've seen something like that. I don't know if it's what you're talking about, but yeah, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. There was a good documentary on that. I read a book not too long ago, like called Rock and Roll, History of Rock and Roll Volume One, which covered rock and roll music from like 1940 to like 1960 something. Anyways, and I haven't read Volume Two yet. I need to go read Volume Two because that's my because then it covers the '60s and '70s, which is my favorite type, my favorite genre or favorite era. But yeah, so I've got a little knowledge to that, and yeah, I love watching documentaries though and reading books on rock history. So that's why I wanted to do this kind of Um, this is my thinking, and again, I can't get too technical here, but um, I feel like rock music, compared to other, maybe compared to jazz, especially compared to like jazz and blues. Again, I'm not a big jazz and blues guy, so you have to tell me, Bryer, if you know more than me. But I feel like the basis of like rock music in writing, the writing style of rock music, and I don't know if they started this or they just kind of took it off somebody else, is you have verse, chorus, verse, like chorus, like that's kind of your
Yeah,
right.
that's the basic. Like I said, I kind of said this already, but again, that whole structure, it's simple.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which I'm guessing blues and jazz. I don't
yeah,
think is.
yeah, yeah. It's not quite. I know jazz is a bit is more nuanced. It's not like a structure. Again, it's like
Yeah,
it's a piece. You know, there's many movements in it, different sections that go on for a certain amount of time. But yeah, there's no like verses. There's no obviously not rarely any choruses. But yeah, and blues, you know, I mean, we've heard many blues. I mean, usually it's like it stays in that key the whole time, just that 12-bar blues basically. Usually sticks in that feel, doesn't really go venture. It's all about the storytelling when it comes to blues. But yeah, once rock and roll became a thing, again, kind of stripped all that and kind of again, it had to be danceable. So and it's got to be memorable. That's gonna get the kids, gotta get the kids going, gotta get the energy going. So yeah, that's kind of the rise of more like that sort of very simplified structure
because
because that's what's getting people's the kids' attention.
I think most music I listen to has that structure, and I don't know if that started around there or they kind of took it and went with it. But I feel like that's a big part of rock on music. Is like anytime I listen to a song, I'm like, all right, there's the first verse. All right, chorus is the thing that really ties the whole song together, and it's like your main
Mm-hmm.
theme of the song, and it's your catchiest part of the song. You love that chorus, you get into that, and then you get back into another verse or like that, and then you might throw in a bridge or a solo in there, and then you end on the chorus. You know, it's almost every song has like kind of like structure that really works. I mean, it's the reason why it's so popular. I think.
Yeah, and again, comparing to like crooner music, I mean, crooner music was still a thing, but even that's kind of not quite like not. I mean, again, it's most of the time it's slow, obviously, a lot of crooner music, and yeah, but it's again, it's not. I mean, it kind of has verses and choruses to it, but it's not like immediate type of stuff. It's kind of like just like laid back type of music. Um, but yeah, but once rock took it more faster pace, that's kind of when it started to be. That's kind of where it started to become more prominent.
I think of blues and jazz music as a lot of improvisation.
Right.
I mean, rock music, you
I'd say
just
more jazz. Yeah, I'd say more jazz. That's more jazz's thing.
yeah.
And
So
blues does do it, but I think jazz kind of does it has a wider range.
yeah, while rock music, I don't know. I mean, you can, but it's more structured. I don't know if that makes sense. You don't maybe improvise as much. I might be totally off in that.
Yeah, not really, not too much.
That's me spitballing here. That I
Hmm.
feel like rock maybe that's what makes it different maybe than jazz and blues a little bit
Yeah, I'd say so.
is less improvisation maybe. And like blues is like a blues scale. I know I always hear this like there's some kind of blues scale that you play on, and I feel like blues. I always hear it's like feels like the guitar player is just doing kind of a blues solo.
Hmm.
In jazz you're doing just all these kind of solos, while rock music it's I hear it's called power chords. And it's just rhythm, like you said. It's just the kind of same rhythm that kind of drives it. If that makes sense. That makes.
Hmm.
I'm just
Yeah,
thinking what makes it different than blues and jazz is probably just the
yeah. It just gets to the point.
yeah,
Doesn't meander, but at any point,
yeah, exactly.
it's just get to the point.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That kind of differentiates it maybe from blues and jazz
Hmm.
at this point. Thompson, yeah, I prefer verse, chorus, verse, but there are a few songs I love that don't use that structure. They need to do a video on that, but need to
Hmm.
have at least five.
Cool.
Yeah, and like I said, I feel like yeah, once you get to like prog rock, they throw that all out the building.
Yeah, no, yeah, they completely throw that out the window.
It's out the window. Yeah, that's what I meant. They just throw that out the window. Like, and I always feel like when I listen to Bob Dylan, he doesn't do.
Yeah, no,
I feel like he just does verses and doesn't do choruses. I hear a song,
not really.
it's
As
like,
you know, he was a. I'd say people can say. I mean, we're getting a bit ahead because he's more '60s, but I mean, he's kind of started. He kind of started to make the rounds in the late '50s, but something
yeah,
around there. But he was. I think people can say he was more of a poet first,
yeah,
and especially early on, the music was just a way to kind of deliver the lyrics.
yeah, exactly.
Of
Yeah, that's my
course, when he
feeling.
goes electric, that's kind of when he's starting to
Uh,
mix it
yeah,
up a little bit.
that's true. Um, yeah, so I think yeah. So we're kind of covering all the way to now. We're kind of getting to the '50s more, and I feel like, and you kind of mentioned this. I guess I think of rock music. Another thing I was thinking about was like, what instruments do you have probably at this point? And your basic, and I don't know if this makes it much different than other genres, but a little bit maybe though, is that your basics are the guitar, the bass, but I don't know if they had electric bass yet. Might have just mostly done the
It might have been like, yeah, probably at that point. I
double bass.
forgot when the electric bass came around. I forgot off the top of my head, but I know typically in that time, even even in Elvis's recordings, it was just upright bass primarily.
Yeah, but still bass is a part of it. Drums, yeah, drum kit. Uh, and then a lot of times in the '50s, a lot of piano. I
Yeah.
hear a lot of piano.
Mm-hmm.
And then the saxophone seems to be a big part of rock music.
Yeah. Like occasionally, some bands kept the horns in their sound. Even with rock and roll, they kept the horn section. So you'll occasionally hear that stuff in there as occasionally.
Yeah, like I was thinking, like I know, like Huey Lewis and the News used saxophone in the '80s,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm
And
sure that,
which that's also kind of harkening back to like early '50s music.
yeah, and somehow it's because it felt like at some point the saxophone kind of died out as like uh, a big instrument in rock and roll music. And then when I hear it, I always love it because I'm like, oh, that's a cool sax solo. I don't know, it's cool because I don't hear it very often. So when I do, it's like, oh. And I played the saxophone in high school, so I always like the sax as well. But I feel like those are kind of the main instruments in rock and roll music. I don't know if I'm
Mm-hmm.
missing there.
Yeah, I think that pretty much are the most common ones at that
The common
time.
one.
Yeah.
You're saying because the big band, you had the big bands, and they had a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And so rock music, of course, yeah,
Yeah, like just kind of truncated the whole thing.
he took everything out and just like we just need, I mean, eventually I feel like four-piece bands were like the most popular. Maybe that's because the Beatles. I think of
Yeah.
a four-man band is the most popular, but even this time, like I said, there might have been like 5 or 6 people, in the band.
Mm-hmm.
But still, probably less than the jazz bands and stuff like that. I'm sure were bigger. Blues. I think I don't know if you just needed like one guy, maybe. I don't know if you needed a whole band or not. Yeah, you did. No, I suppose you had
Sometimes you did, but usually, I mean, traditional blues is mainly just guy and acoustic guitar.
yeah.
Then you get to blues rock, but that's a whole different thing.
Right. Yeah. And um, so yeah, something about, and I was reading, actually read a little bit of it today, like that because of World War II, they were scaling back because they didn't have the money
Mm-hmm.
because all the money was going towards a war effort.
Right.
And so it sounds like maybe that's when music kind of like, okay, we need to compound like how many members we got. And so,
Mm.
and maybe that's how it got to that. You only need, 4 to 6 guys, maybe. I don't know. Um, yeah, the record companies played a big role in growing popularity of rock
Mm-hmm.
music. Like,
Yeah, a lot of advertising was pretty big, trying
because
to appeal to the young generation.
yeah, when they started getting popular in the '50s, yeah, everything kind of came together with radio, TV, DJs starting to pop up here. Um, in fact, what I wrote down was the 3 big record companies I that kind of formed around this time was Atlantic in 1947, which was in New
Mm-hmm.
York, and they had a lot of R&B, I think. So I read that Aretha was like one of the big names on there. I didn't write anybody else. I'm sure there's other ones I didn't see. But then there was Sun Records,
Right.
Tennessee, which is Sam Phillips, which is to me like maybe the biggest name. Like I've heard his name quite a bit. He started in
Yep, that's
1950.
where, of course, that's where Elvis recorded his first stuff.
He had Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Johnny Cash. I mean, he had some huge names, and that was in Memphis, so in the Midwest. So that was a big one. And then Chess Records in
There you
Chicago
go. Yeah.
in 1950 by Phil Chess. And
Yep. All mentioned in this book as well.
okay, I say you probably had some of that information. I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
From what I read, those are the three I wrote down.
Yes. Yeah, those were the big ones.
That you got a lot of these rock and roll people kind of came out of those areas, and like I said, that was a big deal at that time. All right. So I'm trying to think what was my next train of thought here. Well, yeah, I was thinking because I said the saxophone because I felt like when I listened to early 50's, I don't know if I hear guitar solos that much. I don't know if
No, not really.
the guitar didn't have as major a role as it would.
Yeah, no. It was just there to fill sound.
Yeah,
Fill the sound and
was,
for rhythm playing.
Yeah,
and you might occasionally get like a guitar riff or a melody, or stuff like Chuck Berry. Like it had some very iconic guitar intros and stuff like that. But in terms of solos, like, yeah, when you did hear a solo, it was like very short. It was very quick, just very simple. And again, there's no shredding yet, so everything just kind of played very straight, just enough to kind of nice little musical break, and then it goes back into the main melody.
Yeah, I feel like when they had a solo, it was the saxophone. That's what my thinking was like. When they're like, all right.
Or piano. Piano is another one that they probably used a solo.
All right, let's throw a cool solo in. Move away, guitar guy. Bring in the sax guy. Let's hear a good sax solo. Because even like listen to like Yakety Yak from Toasters, or even I think Rock Around the Clock, I think has a sax solo. I don't know. There's so many I hear, and then also the sax comes in. Whatever, and I'm like, oh man, the sax guy is really killing it on that. He was pretty popular, and then eventually it's like, oh, sorry, the guitar guy is more popular, and he's going to take over the the soloing, and then Entwistle's like, I'm going to do it on the bass at some point and take over. No, and all this, but yeah. So I want to talk about kind of the major players and events, maybe.
Okay.
And for me, I think the most, again, coming from somebody who's just a rock enthusiast and I don't have a doctorate degree in rock and roll music, but I've read a fair amount of stuff. And to me, the most significant event to me was "Rockin' Around the Clock" by Bill Haley and the Comets.
Yeah,
which came out in 1954, but really didn't come to hit until 1955, I believe, because of the Blackwood Bird Jungle movie, and it opened. Everybody's like, "Whoa, what is this song?" Because it has this. I mean, it has rock in the song, and so it just to me when I think of rock and roll music, that's the first song I think about as kind of being what really influenced everything else. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, totally. Because once I mean, that whole song kind of has. I feel like I'm looking through my book, and I'm trying to think. Did they have a whole section to that song? I'm trying to look through it, but yeah, I definitely agree. That was definitely a big moment of how rock and roll really starting to come into the mainstream, especially to white audiences, of course. But yeah, I 100% agree. That's a good one to mention.
Yeah, you talked about. I think this is kind of like I said. To me, I should have said this. The two genres I think about, because I'm thinking about genres. What are the major genres of rock music? And to me, the two genres I came up with for the 50's is R&B and rockabilly. To me, that was like that was the big genres. And so like I said, rockabilly. When I say rockabilly, what the definition I read is incorporates country and R&B,
Yes.
which is very to say.
Yeah, and also the name rockabilly. Country music often associated with hillbillies.
Yeah,
rockabilly.
Rock and roll and hillbilly.
Yeah.
uh, yeah. So what is this? It's a little bit different than blues. It's not blues music, I guess, based, but
Yes.
based, I guess. I don't know how to
Yeah.
say
It's
it.
more definitely take because country was like we already established country was already existed by the time rock and roll, and so people and a lot of the country artists were mainly white. That's kind of the main audiences, and so a lot of people saw the rock and roll R&B and decided, why not mix some rock with our country, and that's basically what they did.
Yeah, so that's a lot of basics of yeah, and I feel like I said, I think most of the rockabilly people, I'd say, I mean, all the rockabilly people are kind of like the white rock and roll people, like Bill
Mm-hmm.
Comets. I put Elvis, and they're mostly from kind of the southern region, I would say, Midwest, southern.
Mm-hmm.
And I put Elvis Presley in that category, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis. You can even throw Johnny Cash in there, even though he's country. He's kind of
Yeah.
got rock to
Yeah.
him.
He had some moments.
Yeah, Gene Vincent, Buddy Holly would come around.
Mm-hmm.
Roy Orbison and Eddie Cochran are kind of
Mm-hmm.
what I wrote down as kind of the major rockabilly
Yeah.
singers. I don't know if you have more to add to that or
No, I think those were like the big ones. Those are the ones I came down to as well.
okay. Yeah, so that was kind of one of the big ones. And then R&B, I call it R&B because blues rock is a different genre that we'll talk about. I think I have written down. Uh, I
But
think
it
I
kind of course, blues rock would kind of
uh,
become more popular by the '60s.
yeah. I guess I didn't write that one down in my genres, but because it feels like blues rock is a genre that's throughout the decades, maybe. But
Mm.
uh, yeah, 60s, I guess. Um, but I call it more R&B, which, like I says, it has
That's
some.
it's always funny when we think we're talking about R&B, and I feel like R&B has changed a lot
It
since then.
has.
Yeah, because nowadays R&B is kind of like it's you like if you strip it back, you can still see it, but now these days there's a lot more other genres being thrown in, a lot more modern stuff, like more. I think going back to more gospel and soul type stuff, and nowadays people are incorporating more hip hop influence into it. So it feels like R&B these days has definitely taken on a different meaning.
It's very true. Uh, yeah, R&B is much different. Which I don't have that written down because that's not a rock genre. So I
Yeah,
don't know what do you call that. More associated. I don't know, close to pop maybe, but
yeah,
different style. Uh, yeah, Keith mentions Everly Brothers. That's another one I didn't write down, but that's another good one. Everly Brothers
mm.
fit into that category as well. It's kind of the rockabilly style, I guess. Yeah, because they had a little bit of country in them as well. Um, yeah, so yeah, R&B became soul. Yeah, it's more soul music.
Yeah,
Exactly. Uh, yeah, so rockabilly. Then you got R&B, which is the definition I wrote down. Again, I'm trying to get like this is the textbook definition. Uh, there's probably a better way to say it, but this is the way I wrote it down was that R&B incorporates blues, gospel, and soul music, and is usually driven by either piano or guitar or saxophone. Like I said, I already kind of mentioned that. Originated in African American communities, basically, and like I said, this type of rock has more of a dance aspect to it, I think, and I already kind of mentioned that. But that's kind of what I wrote down as kind of the definition of R&B rock. There might be a better way to say that, but that's the way that's the way it was on I looked on Wikipedia and I kind of wrote down what it said. like if you look in the dictionary or something, like what is this? And I wrote down names. I wrote down was Joe Turner, which I guess is very early. He's like in the 30s, I guess. So he was,
mm.
or even because I don't know much about Joe Turner, but he was a big one. I wrote down James Brown. He has a bit R&B, but he puts funk in it as well, and
Yeah,
soul.
yeah,
And I don't know if he's this big deal during the 50s. Maybe he's more of a 60s artist, but
yeah.
uh,
Kind of like late '50s, early '60s.
I wrote down Etta James. Etta James is definitely soul music, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Along with Aretha Franklin, they're more soul, but they're kind of in that. in that era. I wrote down Fats Domino. Was like a big influence. Little Richard, Bo Diddley, Ray Charles, um, Chuck Berry, someone named Louis Jordan, Muddy Waters. Of course, I've heard big guitar player back in that time. Maybe he might be more blues, but somebody named Ruth Brown. They had written down. I wrote down Sam Cooke, though he's maybe more pop.
Yeah, he's
pop.
more pop soul.
Yeah, he's more Chubby Checker. I mean, he was kind of the
twist.
60s, but he was again has that.
What's his name?
Yeah, and he was more of a novelty singer. It felt like, but he took off. I wrote down the Coasters, the Drifters, and Smokey Robinson. Again, those are more 60s, I suppose. But I wrote down what I have is the big R&B singers. Let's see, yeah, what we now call R&B is unrecognizable. Yeah, rhythm of the 50s. That name can't be tracked. Yeah, we have a whole different definition kind of for it. Yeah, Big Joe Turner. Yeah, Ike and Tina Turner, which
they started in the 50s.
Yeah, me and Nick we're covering 1961, and they had a record in 1961, which I was like, I couldn't believe like they were that far back, like because I think of like Proud Mary was their big song. That probably didn't come.
Now that came out in the 70s.
That came out in the 70s, and then Tina Turner was big in the 80s. So I was like,
she's had a long career.
BB King.
Yeah.
The greatest blues guitar player or at least one of them. I would almost say probably the greatest blues guitar player. I didn't listen to any of his music because it's too bluesy, but he's a really good guitar player. Anyway, so those are the two genres I feel like that really encapsulates the 50s, and the kind of how that's the definition I would say for them. One's more country and the other one's more blues based, I suppose.
Yeah, like blues or jazz for rhythm and blues, and soul, like we said.
And those are some of the big names. And just some stuff I wrote down, and then you probably have some stuff you can also attest to maybe. We have to talk about Elvis, I think. The big one to me was Heartbreak Hotel when it came out in 1956 was a huge #1 hit for him.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the one that really, I feel like that's the one that really, because he had songs before that. But that's like the song that really rocketed him to stardom for me.
Yeah, I'd say so. Of course, he had like Blue Suede Shoes. That was his other big one during this time.
Yeah.
Then there's probably other ones up, but just
like
on top of my head. Hound Dog, yes, which was also a cover.
Yeah. Blue Suede Shoes was the Carl Perkins song. Yeah. And Hound Dog, that came. There's a female that sang that song way back.
Yeah. Big Mama Thornton.
Big Mama Thornton. Yeah. She had this. Yeah, that's right. She sang it back even further. Yeah. Like All Right Mama, I think was his first hit, but I don't know if it was a big #1 for him. Like Heartbreak Hotel was like absolutely huge. I don't know. Can you say more about Elvis? Like what do you think? What made him star? Or like?
I mean, we kind of already mentioned it as we were going. Yeah, we kind of already mentioned it as we were going, because again, he was just this guy from Memphis. You know, he was very influenced by a lot of the black music, going to black churches and stuff like that. I think it does touch upon it in his movie. Granted, gotta take those movies with a grain of salt, but it's been established, it's been well documented that he was very much a fan of that type of stuff, and that was the stuff he kind of took influence by. And of course, he met the Colonel, the good old Tom. What's his name? Tom Parker. That's his name, right? Yeah. Once he met him, gonna make him a big star. Literally making a deal with the devil there. But yeah, of course, again, he was very good looking. That was another big thing that made him. He was at that time. He was one of the most attractive men in the world.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, his dance moves also garner him a lot of attention. And he did have a good voice, and that's
Oh,
another thing
incredible
they
voice.
always talk about. Like especially this early in his career, people like that kind of very youthful, very high energy, very expressive type of vocals that he had. And yeah, he was just the perfect vehicle to bring R&B, rhythm, rockabilly to the masses.
Yeah, that's the record. Yeah, you have that. It's called Elvis Presley. I think that's just a
Yeah,
song.
yeah,
The
it's
day.
his first album, and I will say, it does belong in probably the most important debuts in music history.
I was gonna say if you again like if I could recommend, I not that I'm a big fan of like that album necessarily, but that I think that's a if you want to get an Elvis album, that would be the one to get. I would
Yeah,
venture to say.
yeah, I'd probably
As,
say so.
as far as historically, yeah, like I said, historical albums, I think in 50s rock that'd be one. The only thing I have is this
I
Elvis
have that too.
30 number one hits. I would say this is a good buy to have for Elvis to get
Yeah,
into. Uh,
I have Blue Hawaii, but I don't think that's a good one to get though. That's,
yeah,
unless you really love Can't Help Falling in Love.
yeah, that was a big album because we were covering albums from that era, that year. I believe that was 60 or 61. We were, and that was a huge album for him. Of course, he was doing a bunch of movie
Movies. Yeah.
albums. Like like he has one in 62 called Girls, Girls, Girls. It's actually not too bad. It actually has a couple of really good songs on it. But yeah, Don't Be Cruel is a great song. Love Me Tender, All Shook Up. Uh,
Hmm.
Let Me Be Your Teddy Bear. I kind of like that one. My favorite is Jailhouse Rock, which Keith mentions. That's
Oh
my favorite.
yeah, there you go.
I love that song. That's my favorite song of the 50s.
Yeah, the same here.
That song rocks. I mean,
I mean,
bum,
it's got rock in the name.
bum, bum, bam, oh, so good. Uh, yeah, that's kind of his. Those are all the big hits I can see in the 50s period, anyways, from that record. But um, yeah, my feeling on Elvis, because I mean, he is the biggest star of the 50s.
Yep. I mean, we call him I think even
He's the
today,
king.
the king.
He is called the king of rock and roll for good reason.
Is he really the king? That's up to debate, but we give him that.
We give him that title. Uh, well, he just took off. Like, yeah, like I said, part of it is the music, part of it is the look
Hmm.
and his showmanship. He had a great
Yeah.
showmanship about him, which I think it feels like there was nobody like that at that time. He
Oh yeah,
just,
totally. Yeah. I mean, the closest you had was maybe Little Richard and Chuck Berry,
yeah,
but
yeah,
Elvis like really took it further.
yeah. And Elvis played the little guitar, I think, but mostly I think of him out there just, yeah, gyrating on just having the microphone
Hmm.
and doing, I don't know. And just, you love this, the slick back hair looks so, he looked cool. Like I watch it and I go, man, that's such a cool looking guy. Like I said, good looking guy, had a great voice, good move. Everything just worked perfectly. And it felt like he just came at the right time, maybe.
Hmm. And he had good promoters as well.
Yeah. And he had a good backing band. His backing band was really good as well.
Hmm.
I always see his guitar players always considered like one of the great early guitar players. I think his name was Scott something, if I'm right.
Hmm.
Um, but I always felt like this is my thinking, and I don't know if anybody's is uh, conferred with me that it's correct, but I always felt like I said, I get this feeling like just from what I know of history is like there's probably this divide in racial backgrounds that you had the black audiences were listening maybe more the blues stuff and the black artists and you probably had the white kids that were like listen more to the white artists, and then Elvis came and I feel like Elvis took blues songs but made it accessible to everybody. That was my thinking is why he was so popular and took off amongst I mean just not amongst white but black and white
Mm.
to him. And maybe nobody else could do that but Elvis just had the right look, he had the right voice, he had the right style that it just united everybody. I don't know if again
Mm.
my thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, again, there's going to be a lot. I mean, there's always debates on Elvis's legacy. I mean, you know, he's in some regards he's still kind of controversial, especially when you talk to certain people. How much how much he took from black community and kind
Right,
of
right, yeah,
whitewashed it,
yeah.
or in a sense. But it's like you said, it was just he was just the perfect vehicle, and it was like you said, it was just the right time, and yeah, it worked out for him. You know, again, we probably wouldn't be rock and roll would probably be very different if it weren't for Elvis,
Oh,
and especially how many people were influenced by
yeah,
him moving forward. Heck, Freddie Mercury, my favorite singer,
yeah.
was influenced by him to an extent.
Okay.
I mean, you
So
have Crazy Little Thing Called Love.
yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's very
Mm-hmm.
Elvis sounding.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, oh yeah, you're right. Like how many bands were formed because of? I mean,
I mean, the Beatles also were influenced by Elvis.
oh, Elvis is huge for the Beatles to.
Of course, when they finally met him, there was kind of a letdown, but still.
I mean, yeah, when you hear about John was like heard Elvis or whatever, and he like said to his friends, "All right, we're starting a skiffle group," and that
Mm-hmm.
formed the Quarrymen, which then would be the Beatles. So if it wasn't for Elvis, yeah, I don't think John would have started that skiffle group, the Quarrymen, and gone from there. I mean, and same thing for Paul and George as well. They're all in England listening to American rock and roll music and going, man, I want that. And so all these great bands, of course, we'll talk about in the '60s. All of a sudden, all the best bands came out of England, not America, because they listened to Elvis. And I guess that makes me think, like, yeah, there wasn't. Well, I guess we'll get here. I mean, the closest thing we have to a rock and roll band, I feel like, is Buddy Holly and the Crickets. But even then, it feels like it's really Buddy Holly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. That's kind of when you had the first, like, insert name and the backing band.
yeah. Besides that, everybody was there wasn't really bands at that time.
Yeah, no, not really.
It was Chuck. It was a little bit, it's just a single singer
Mm-hmm.
was driving it, and it wasn't until '60s. I guess again we'll get that later, but it really went until '60s that rock bands became the big thing, which is kind of funny to think about because I think of rock bands more than I think of rock artists, but it really started with the rock artists and then eventually came rock bands because of the rock artists kind of influenced them. Um, Tom says, I think Hound Dog was Elvis' first big hit. Yeah, that was one of the first big ones. But Big Mama Thornton's version is far superior. That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, I can see. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt. I wouldn't argue with that.
Keith says his name was unusual. Now, anytime you hear, you don't hear too many Elvises, but I think it'd
Yeah,
be your kid Elvis because
that's true. You don't really. I mean, can you name another Elvis in your life? Me
uh,
neither.
there's a Chiefs quarterback back in the '90s named Elvis Grbac, but that's um, yeah. At this time period, that's something interesting to mention. I didn't think about is a lot of this. Well, I think Chuck Berry wrote some of his stuff.
Yeah,
Elvis
that's
did.
true. I mean, his debut is full of covers.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't. There's not one song that was written by him.
Elvis didn't really write. He had the
Yeah.
Stoller and something were the two big songwriters that wrote like all of Elvis's big hits.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry and Stoller, or is that am I thinking that right? I probably won't see anywhere. But anyways, uh, you had songwriters that were right for the artists. It wasn't until Buddy Holly that really uh, kind of changed, I think, as far as I know, changed the idea that, hey, how about the guy singing the song write the song. And Buddy Holly started becoming more of a songwriter, and I know that was a big influence on it. I know a lot about the Beatles, so I always go back to the Beatles. I know they're hugely influenced by Buddy Holly and his songwriting, and that's when they were like, "Hey, how about we write our own stuff?" And then Lennon McCartney become the greatest songwriters of all time. Because yeah, Elvis didn't write. I'm guessing I don't know if Little Richard did. Maybe I don't know.
I think he did.
Um,
Yeah, I think he did.
he probably did. I know Chuck Berry did some of his writing. But for the most part, most artists didn't write their own music, which is kind of interesting and that would happen in the '60s as well. But I feel like I don't know if the Beatles were the ones who changed that, where at some point people were started to go, oh, we should write our own stuff, and you started seeing more rock bands write their own songs. I think later on, but
I think because it could be because they realized they could make more money that way.
that's true. That's a big part of it. See, you're right, Jason. Elvis broke the color barrier. Okay, that's okay. So Tom burning it. That's what I was thinking. That was my thought on the whole thing of how he was so huge because of that. That was a big thing, I think, to unite the different races together. You know, because I'm guessing back then it was very divided. You know, we know it was politically, but yeah, being the first white artist performing that type of music, yeah, music that anybody could enjoy. But yeah, I don't know if I was on a thought process there, but well, so yeah, so we had to talk about I think another big influence. Well, okay, I already talked about Buddy Holly, I guess. I do have a Buddy Holly. Let's see, let me find it. 50 songs, which is really cool. Pretty much all of
50
his songs.
Is that his full catalog, basically?
Probably. I don't know. It's all of his big songs, I guess. But someone bought this for me, but it's really cool, the Buddy Holly collection. Buddy Holly is probably my favorite artist of the 50s. I really like his music.
Yeah, he's had some good stuff.
Yeah, it's great stuff. It really hit in 57 with the Tripping Crickets album, which I really like that album. I've heard that album. I don't own it. I would love to get that at some point. I would say if you get a Buddy Holly album, I would think Tripping Crickets would be to me the best album I've heard. And he only made a couple albums before he died. That's the crazy part. He made all these songs between 57 and 59. He dies in 59. It's just insane how much influence he had in like 2 years. Which is the reason why they, it's the day the music died, huge loss when he died in 59. Like I said, another one that influenced the pretty much everybody. I mean, I think the biggest thing we say about all these artists is how influential they are to the Beatles, to
the Stones,
the Hollies, the Kinks, anybody that was big in the 60s. They all probably first heard Elvis and Buddy Holly and Chuck Berry, or I think everybody. I doubt you could find anybody that was not a big fan of those artists that became something later on, and then all those artists influenced everybody else in the 70s and 80s, probably, and whatever. But yeah, Buddy Holly, huge influence. Just not only just his guitar playing, which again, not a lot of guitar soloing, but just a lot of really good guitar chords and rhythms, and stuff like Peggy Sue and That'll Be the Day and Someday, or Every Day is my favorite song from Buddy Holly. Not Fade Away is great. Rock tune anyways, but yeah. I don't know if you have any more to say than that, but
no, that sums him up, I think. And he also had a pretty iconic look as well.
Yeah, the glasses,
his kind of his hairstyle.
I feel like he had a nerdy look to him or something. I don't know.
I guess that was his appeal. Had that kind of very clean look.
Yeah, he had a very clean look.
Yeah. And I mean, also vocally, you can say he was pretty unique. He had a kind of very, very innocent. I won't say maybe innocent is not the right word, but it's a very unique type of voice. It's not a trained type of voice. It's kind of sounds like just an ordinary guy. Anybody could do it.
He had kind of a weird, effect on his voice.
Yeah, kind of nasally in a sense, a little bit.
Peggy Sue. I don't know. He had this. I don't know. He had a very unique, funny how, he took off very well during this time period. I had to mention Chuck Berry. He had a song called Maybelline in 1955, which was a huge hit for him. And again, all this stuff starts around 55. I feel like to me is like that's the year like rock and roll just really exploded on the scene. Again, Chuck Berry, I don't have any of his music personally. I know there's there's a compilation album that's very popular called like something rock, I forget now, that I've seen on the list. It's hard to pinpoint an album from Chuck Berry
Mm,
again because he has a lot of singles, but
yeah,
not a big album that has like
right.
all that. But what would you say about Chuck Berry's influence on?
I mean, he was kind of like the early guitar hero in that time. I mean, his showmanship obviously played a role. I mean, I believe Jimi Hendrix was influenced by him to an extent. Of course, Jimmy
Yeah,
took it even further. Of course, he's the one that Chuck Berry's the guy who made the duck walk.
the Duck
You
Walk.
know,
I know.
yeah. I mean, you see old footage of him performing. Like it was definitely something. He was definitely taking the guitar player and definitely helping it bring it out from because, like we established, like for a period, it was more like a background thing, just for like rhythm and stuff like that. But Chuck kind of made the guitar that lead instrument even
Yeah,
more. And again, he had lots of catchy melodies and choruses. Johnny Be Good, another big one.
so good.
I mean, that guitar riff. That's kind of where riffs were starting to become a thing at
I
that
wonder
point.
one who started that because that's the first early memory of hearing that
Hmm.
that incredible for that time period.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, other than that, like he was definitely. I mean, he's definitely up there as the one of the big pillars of rock and roll, like making it what it is today. Um, yeah, especially for guitar players.
Yeah, I think I don't know, I would say maybe the best guitar player of the 50s. I can't think of anybody else that was more influential.
I mean, maybe Les Paul, but
Yeah, sure.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, even watching Back to the Future and watching Marty McFly play Johnny, it's so great. And yeah, that song just rocks. Really, that's no one of my favorite songs from the '50s period. I know you got like what Sweet Little 16, or
oh yeah,
uh,
yeah,
there's a I'm forgetting a lot. Johnny B. Good's the main one I know of, but I know he had a
yeah,
lot of hits. Um, there's a song about school, I think. I forget now, but
yeah. Let me see. I mean, Roll Over Beethoven was another big hit
oh,
for
that's
him.
Beatles covered. Yeah, Roll Over Beethoven and Rock and Roll Music. Did he do?
Yeah, rock and roll music.
That was a big one. Yeah,
Hmm. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that's like the big ones. I know what you're talking about, like something 16 something. I forgot too. I, something like that.
yeah, something like Little 16. I don't know something. But yeah, yeah. Again, he's another one that the Beatles covered and absolutely influenced them and their guitar playing. Oh, there's somebody else I remember. Oh, I was reading. I think it was Carl Wilson. I was reading that Carl Wilson said
Mm.
his biggest influence was Chuck Berry.
I mean, yeah. I mean, they even have a song where they took a Chuck Berry riff, but I think it was Fun Fun Fun. They got
Really?
sued for that.
Okay.
Yeah, Chuck sued them.
I think John Lennon got sued as well by Chuck Berry or something.
Yeah, Chuck kind of did a lot of suing.
Yeah, I guess he did.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's another kind of interesting person.
Character, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I just reading. See, he was
Don't
he
just
was
don't read just don't go too deep. You'll find some very weird stuff.
um they call him the father of rock and roll is what I was reading
Yeah, like
today.
maybe like God, like yeah, maybe Father. I mean, there's lots of people you can say that's the Godfather of rock. I'm sure we'll get to like some other ones in a bit, but yeah, Chuck's definitely one of the big pillars.
Yeah, exactly. Elvis is the king and Chuck is the father is what I'm hearing.
Mhm.
In fact, I was reading somebody saying that he invented rock and roll, which he didn't invent it, but that's
Yeah.
how influence he was, that someone even said he basically invented it. um the other big name, I have one more big name on here, and then I'll give it to you if you have any other people you want to talk about. But is Little Richard? I think is the other one you have to talk about. The big song is Tutti Frutti in 1955 was the huge hit that really, from what I read, really kind of took off for him as well. And Keith says James Dean died in 1955, which
Yeah.
he was again talk about rebellion. And he also says Pat Boone covered Little Richard Tutti Frutti.
I can only imagine what we did with that song.
That's the whitewashing that
Oh
they did
yeah.
at the time. But yeah, Tutti Frutti was a huge one. Lucille, I believe.
Lucille, Long Tall Sally.
Yeah, Long Tall Sally.
Golly Miss Molly.
Golly Miss Molly. Yeah. Oh, yeah, CCR covered that, didn't they?
Yeah.
And he described his music. He was piano, like Chuck Berry's guitar, Elvis kind of guitar, I guess.
Little guitar, mainly voice though.
Buddy Holly's guitar. Little Richard was the big piano one that I can think of. I mean, you also have Jerry Lee Lewis also around this time period. I don't think we think about piano maybe as a rock and roll instrument as much, but then when you watch Little Richard play it, man, he rocks the heck out of the piano. Like he stands up and he's like, you see him really pounding the keys. It's kind of fun to watch. Like, he really threw a lot into the piano. I think that maybe, I don't know if he's maybe the most influential rock piano player or artist. I don't know how to say that, but he definitely had this, and I even read today a little bit about him. Like, they kind of describe his music as being a little influenced by boogie woogie, which I agree. Like, there's definitely a big bounce to his music. Like I said, he really pounds those keys, so there's a really good to it. And he's just had an incredible voice as well, very unique at the time. And I've read that he was also a big racial barrier person that white kids were like, I like this music, you know? And so he brought the white kids together with the black and, you know, as well. But I don't know if you had any more to say about Little Richard.
Oh no, yeah, like you said, he was like one of the most influential piano and rock. I mean, he is, you know, Elton John is like the big example of, because he was a huge Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis fan, and those two people really were big influence on piano and rock. And also just showmanship, another person who really brought showmanship into rock music. I mean, and it worked out because he was kind of more flamboyant with everything. So he definitely gave him a much wider appeal because they just liked his overall personality, just how like outgoing and how personable he was. And just like you see photos of him on the piano, like you said, just pounding the keys, and just how he's standing up and just moving along. And I think he's like putting his foot on the piano and just kind of just going to town on it.
Which I imagine not easy to do. I don't play the piano, but
me neither.
I can't imagine doing that.
Yeah, but yeah, for the reason you said, like that, he's definitely. I mean, so many people cover his songs all the time. Even Elvis covered his song on his debut. He covered Tutti Frutti here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yes. And of course, many rock and rolls in the 60s, like, of course, like the Beatles, for one, did a lot of Little Richard covers. But of course, they did Long Tall Sally, Over Beethoven. Yeah, and then, of course, we mentioned CCR briefly. They did Good Golly Miss Molly, which is also a really great cover. Just overall, like, he kind of like Elvis in the sense he definitely put showmanship to the rock star. And yeah, many people can go back. Yeah, I mean, Freddie Mercury, of course, took a big influence from him as well, with that flamboyant nature that Freddie also had as well. But yeah, definitely another big one.
For life of me, I have no idea what Tutti Frutti is. That's such a weird title.
Yeah, you don't. It's probably best you don't need to know. I mean, if you look at the lyrics, it tells you all of it.
Oh, okay. A little corruption there.
A little, like we mentioned, that sexual thing.
The sexual, nature. Oh man, yeah, that's such a weird title, but yeah, it's a catchy song. Yeah. What I read is he was called.
I mean, look, I even found a photo of him, of Little Richard. Like, hopefully you can see it. Let me see.
Just a little bit.
There it is.
Yeah, there he is.
His leg, his foot on the piano and everything.
Yeah. And what I read today, he was called the architect of rock and roll. So,
yeah.
Uh,
Architect.
so there you got the
We have the
king.
king, the father, and the architect.
So that's why I felt like they had to be mentioned there. Kind
Mhm.
of big pillars of rock and roll music at the time. Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, Jerry Lee Lewis. Yeah, again, he's kind of similar. He was a guy who just stood up, pounded those keys.
Yep, and use his foot sometimes.
Yeah, and I love when they do the when they
Yeah,
I don't know that, but
I know there's a name for it, but I forgot what I don't know what it's called.
you go or whatever.
Yeah, I don't play piano.
Me either. But when they do that, I love that.
Yeah, and also another thing about Little Richard, again, his vocal, another one that's vocally, he definitely gave rock that more out, like he when he belted, it was
Yeah.
like he was like really putting it out there. Especially like stuff like Good Golly Miss Molly, like that, like when he's going a bit more aggressive,
Yeah. When he
like
hits.
again, a lot of you can hear a lot of rock singers really adopting that.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, Chuck Berry. Yeah, he's definitely a bigger singer than like Chuck Berry was. I would say.
Yeah, yeah,
Berry was a fine singer, but I don't think that was he was his best point. Maybe. Yeah, like I said, Elvis was good, but Little Richard might be the best singer actually out of
yeah. I
that
think
group.
yeah, I'd say he was
Now
probably the best singer of the
now you
three.
said probably had the biggest voice out of them all.
Hmm.
But yeah, Jerry Lee Lewis. I don't know a lot about him to be honest, except for Great Balls of Fire
Yeah,
was his big one, which was great. Again, a good rock.
another influence to Elton John.
Yeah, an influence for sure. One of the original Hall of Famers. I think he was one of the first class of Hall of Famers that got in.
Mm.
A little controversial. He
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah,
He kind of disappeared in the '60s because of something he did. Um, so I don't think about him as much because of that. I'm like,
then
ugh.
again, a lot of we're finding out a lot of these big influencers of rock did something pretty shady.
Very, very true. Yeah,
I think probably Chuck. Look, I already mentioned Chuck's briefly mentioned Chuck's ordeals.
yeah, he had some bad ordeals as well. Yeah, Fats Domino. I don't know a lot about Fats Domino either, except for Blueberry Hill and Ain't That a Shame. I think were his big hits.
Mm.
Very influential. Like I said, obviously a lot of people afterwards. I know say a lot of good things about Fats Domino. Um, Ready Teddy and Rip It Up. Uh,
Those are might be in Fat's songs.
what's that?
I think that might be in Fat Domino songs. I'm not
Uh,
sure though.
I
Yeah,
think that sounds familiar, but yeah, Ready Teddy. That sounds familiar. Um, for me, those are the four big artists that I wrote down. Again, I have a hard time with albums. I know Little Richard had some probably albums out that were
I know his debut was pretty. I think his debut was pretty big.
so. I need to get something from him. Usually, I just get compilation out or best of albums. That's the best way.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think a lot of these early rock and roll
Yeah,
artists are mainly compilation acts. Like you just get a find a good compilation and you're good.
exactly. So I need to get a Chuck Berry one and like a Little Richard one. I don't have any of theirs. So I just got Elvis. I got Buddy Holly. I have Sam Cooke though. That's not exactly rock, but around that time. Little Richard songs. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to venture more into probably those artists. Um, yeah. Is there any, so I guess I'll give it to you, Bryer, if you have any other artists or albums you want to talk about in the '50s. That's all I've got really.
I mean, like you, in terms of albums, yeah, I got nothing much. I mean, again, I got this. That's all I got.
That's something.
Yeah, it's something. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like the biggest names in rock. I mean, I think you mentioned I think you mentioned all the very much big important ones. You know, Elvis, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and even Jerry Lee Lewis. I can throw in there as well. Another good showman.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, again, another reason why rock really became big. Again, once TV hit. I mean, it was all about visuals at that point now, and now you can see these people in action at your home. Definitely gave them a wider appeal, give them more branching out around the country, so they got a wider audience, and people know them now. And yeah, Yeah. So yeah, I don't have much to add to that. But and we already mentioned some of the big songs from this period. But I think that kind of just goes to show just how important these people were.
Yeah, it just reminded me of kind of almost a funny story about Bill Haley and the Comets that I read in I think I read it in the Beatles book that I have, the Tune In, uh, the Mark Lewison book. I think he mentions it in there. Because like I said, he was like really the first big one that came out, the rock and roll, rock around the clock, and he had some other hits that I can't remember top of my mind, but he had a couple other hits that came out after that. And the Beatles, that was kind of the first one that were like, oh my gosh, this is really great. Like, and he came to England and did a concert in like England. It was like kind of a big deal. It's like, oh my gosh, Bill Haley from America is coming to England, because England didn't have a big rock act. They're all Americans. So that was big for England. Like, oh my gosh, we got Billy Haley and the Comets, coming in, and all the Beatles, the four Beatles were, like, oh man, we really want to go to this concert. I don't know if they, maybe I can't remember if they did, if any of them, maybe I think so. I think maybe somebody did. I can't remember, but the thing was, they didn't know what Bill Haley looked like, and if you know
Oh,
what Bill looked like, he's a little chubby. He's not
yeah,
like
kind of balding too.
he's like, yeah, he's a little bit, I don't know if how old he was, but he wasn't quite Elvis,
No.
what Elvis would be, And so it's funny when Bill Haley came on, and they're like, "Oh, that's what Bill Haley looked like," and evidently that was kind of a turnoff, I guess, for some people. Though they loved the music, and then they saw him live, and like, "Oh, that's what." I guess so. I was like, "Oh, poor Bill Haley," but again, that's probably why Elvis took off so well, because he came in and like, "Oh man, this guy looks cool," and then all the girls were like, that's like to me where. I don't know about the other artists, but I know Elvis, like the girls went crazy. And I don't know if that's the beginning of girls going to concerts and screaming or not, but
Possibly.
it might be. I know the Beatles were another one where just girls went crazy and and all this. And I just now thought I didn't mention one woman. I guess I don't really have a lot of girl influences in rock. I guess they're more pop music at this time.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, Big Mama Thornton is probably the big female rock
okay, Big
person
Mom.
at the time.
I meant
Um,
Etta James and Aretha. They're more soul, but I can't really think. Women weren't really into rock maybe at this time. I guess that's why I did.
mm, yeah,
Um,
not quite. Yeah, I'm sure there was, but none of them got as much nearly as much attention as
in
some of
fact,
the male guys at the time. Because yeah, a lot of them were more of the jazz pop sort of
yeah.
field.
In fact, I'm having a hard time thinking of a woman rock artist until what Joan Jett and
I mean, the '60s would have like some
Wilson.
yeah, big rock. I mean, Janis Joplin in the '60s was the big
Yeah.
one.
Okay. Yeah, you can put her in there.
Yeah, I guess you could put Grace Slick there as well.
Very slick. Okay, that's true. I didn't want to leave women out. I didn't mean to, but it's more men influence, I guess.
Yeah, again, it was entertainment. Entertainment was not kind to women. Even today, it's still not that kind of women.
Tom said albums were much less of a thing in the 50s. Exactly. Yeah. I don't even know when vinyl became a big deal. I don't know if
I
that
mean,
came.
vinyl was always around,
Was it?
but again, it was kind of meant for like the older people, the older crowd.
Okay.
I think we've talked about it before, where it was mainly the old people buying the albums. That was meant for mainly for a lot of rich people because they were a lot more expensive.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
again,
You're
once rock and roll and the single became a big thing, a lot cheaper, and so a lot of teens were able to buy them. So that's why a lot of
right.
teens
Nice.
went for the 45s.
Which only had two songs on it, I guess. Just
Yeah, that was all you needed sometimes.
I guess that's man. I can't. I don't have any 45s.
I have a
I don't.
couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a few, not
Oh, you
too
do.
many. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
just a few.
Oh,
Of course, I got Queen. This was like that's like an outtake from the Miracle sessions. Of course, I got Into Deep by Genesis.
oh, wow. Okay.
Yep, and also got Phil Collins, One More Night. And last one is The Police, Wrapped Around Your Finger.
Okay. Do you play them?
Yeah, I play them sometimes.
Okay. I was gonna say, what's it like playing a song and just hearing a song and then flip it over and then you're you're done? It's like
Pretty
well, that
much.
work for disc.
Again, a lot of these were popular with disc jockeys as well. Disc jockeys always used the 45s because they were quick. Again, they're a lot smaller, so you can fit a lot more. And so you
Yeah.
just had to take it out, replace it, and then
Oh,
boom, we're done.
yeah, you're right. That would make, yeah,
It
that.
just kind of saved you time.
Oh, yeah, that'd be the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It probably came easier when you had like cassettes
And
and CDs.
also, again, with our radio, again, like I said, it was faster. And of course, with radio, you want to try to keep things make it different each time. So with an album, it's just the same person the whole time, and eventually people want to
Yeah,
hear something else.
yeah, that's right. That wouldn't work very well.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, CDs must have been revolutionary, and then of course digital music was revolutionary too.
Yeah.
You just click on the thing on the
Yeah.
computer nowadays.
Just sometimes one subscription, and then boom, you got everything. Well,
Or
mostly everything.
yeah, I don't know if you need disc jockeys. You maybe just have it programmed that just plays and you just talk
Yeah, there are some that don't use use DJs. It's just a guy talking, and then
and just push a button. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, it's not an art form like back then. Yeah, you had to
yeah, no.
put it on, get it off. I can't imagine. I'd be like nervous wreck. Gotta get the next one on to get the needle on. Oh, much different. That's interesting. Yeah, because I never listened to 45. I mean, we got. I don't know if LPs came. You said LPs came a bigger deal, maybe in the 60s, or
Yeah,
you had EPs and you had LPs.
LPs, yeah.
Eventually, LPs were the big thing, which
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what I own. There was something else because I have these Bing Crosby albums, and they weren't originally LPs. They were like 78s or something like that. I think.
70. I mean, they're still kind of count as LP. I think it's like a different
Or
size.
I should say they weren't 33 and a third, whatever. They're 70.
Yeah, 33 thirds or 45. Yeah.
They weren't 45,
Yeah, I don't own any of those.
which
So
we don't do 78s anymore. But
not
uh,
really.
I guess back in the day it must, which I didn't know this until I
Yeah, I
got these.
think it was more common. That stuff was a bit more common back then.
Because I got these Bing Crosby albums that were made back in the 30s and 40s, so they had to transfer that to the 33 whatever discs or something,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was interesting. I didn't know about, but I guess I said all that just to say, like, yeah, whenever vinyl became a big deal, that probably changed music because you can actually
Yeah, it kind of made it even more accessible.
accessible. You have the record right there, you can play, and that became a big deal in the 50s and 60s, especially 60s. I know. I always think of. I was gonna say. I always think of Grease, the movie Grease, when I think of
Mm-hmm.
50s rock music.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the clothing,
Clothing,
the
the look.
dance, the look. That's a great movie to watch for I think 50s rock. But yeah,
Even though a lot of the music, even though the movie started with a 70s disco track.
Frankie Valli.
Yeah. Written by by Barry Gibb, I think. Yeah.
Oh right, yeah, yeah. That was made in the 70s, but yeah, 50s in Chicago. Yeah, John Lennon had the rock and roll album. He covered. Oh, Chuck Berry, I think. Because I know Chuck Berry sued him, and then he had to play he did the album, yeah, to play Chuck Berry or something as a I don't know, something weird happened there. But yeah, Ricky Nelson, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I just covered one of his albums. Ricky is 21. Made both me and Nick's top 10 favorite albums from '61. So that's a good Ricky Nelson album. Ricky is 21. Yeah, female rock artists were unheard of in the 50s. A handful of country. Yeah, Patsy Cline,
Yeah. Mary Ford. Yeah.
Rick Ford. Yeah, but not until the 60s. Yeah. All right. Well, I don't have more to say than that. Hopefully, we did a good job covering kind of a little bit of history of rock and roll and covering
Had a
the early.
nice nice discussion talking about certain aspects of rock and roll.
Yeah, I think yeah, hopefully it was educational and hopefully enjoy that.
Yeah.
Definitely feel
Yeah.
free to,
Whoever made this book should definitely hire us.
yeah. Yeah, definitely feel free to comment on your favorite artist, maybe, or I don't know,
Or some
albums.
other facts about the 50s that maybe we missed out.
Yeah, that maybe we missed to talk about. Um, Next time, just a kind of what I want to talk about next time is I want to get into the British invasion and folk rock music of the 60s. So it'll be different when we get to that because we won't be talking about the history so much, and we already covered that, so we can get
Yeah.
right to
Yeah, now we're going to talk about really taking, because the 60s is where genres, more rock genres are going to start to rise. And there's the 60s start a lot.
Yeah. So, and we're both big fans, I think, of this era. So we will have more talk about the bands and
More
the
albums to show.
albums to talk about. Yeah, that'll be a bigger deal. So I'll be excited to talk about those genres next, anyways. And so anybody listening, that's what you got to look forward to, anyway. So besides that, thank you, Bryer, for joining me. I really appreciate your time and your
This was
knowledge.
fun. This was been a blast to do.
Good,
So
good.
I'm glad. I'm glad you invited me to do this.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you came because it's fun. I enjoy talking about this kind of stuff. So and hearing other people their thoughts. So yeah, for me and Bryer, I just thank you for everybody watching and commenting. Tom Hits Parade, Keith. I think are the two big ones that commented. So thanks for commenting. I really appreciate you guys. Mike early on. And yeah, I love your comments and thank you for contributing. And anybody watching it, thank you as well. So besides that, goodbye and have the rest of the good weekend. We'll see you later.